The final complaint, a thin sheet of paper plastered to the window of his truck, felt colder than the November wind that whipped around the corner of the industrial lot. It was the 27th one. 27 official, meticulously filed grievances in as many days. Leo Vance ran a calloused thumb over the bold, accusatory type. Grease buildup, improper waste disposal, unlicensed operation. Each one was a lie, a carefully crafted dagger aimed at the heart of his $300 refuge. The truck, a rust-pocked relic he had named the Rolling Stove, was more than just a business. It was a monastery, a fortress, a tomb for the man he used to be. Would this 27th paper finally be the one to shatter its steel walls and expose the ghost hiding inside? Leo peeled the notice from the glass. The adhesive pulled with a reluctant sigh, leaving a sticky residue that would mock him for days. He folded it neatly, a habit from a life that demanded precision, and tucked it into the pocket of his worn jacket. Inside the truck, everything was immaculate. The stainless steel grille gleamed under a single fluorescent bulb, scrubbed clean of the day's labor. The spatulas and knives hung in military order. This tiny, cramped space was the only part of his world he could control, and he controlled it with a fierce, silent desperation. He was not a cook anymore. He was a janitor who happened to serve food. The joy was gone, surgically removed by a past that felt like a phantom limb, always aching, always there. He had bought the truck with the last of his untainted cash, the crumpled bills he'd had in his pocket on the night his world burned down. $300 for a shell on wheels. He had towed it to this forgotten corner of the city, a place of warehouses and broken asphalt, and slowly, painstakingly, brought it back to a state of functional grace. He served one thing, a simple burger, ground fresh every morning, with hand-cut fries. It was honest food, unpretentious, and stripped of the artistry that had once been his lifeblood. He cooked, not to create, but to survive, to keep the ghosts at bay. The city was a gray, indifferent beast. Rain slicked the pavement, reflecting the jaundiced glow of a distant street lamp. The air smelled of wet concrete and diesel fumes. It was a perfect reflection of his internal landscape, desolate, functional, and devoid of color. He had chosen this place for its anonymity. No one here knew the name Leo Vance, the culinary prodigy whose star had imploded in a shower of embers and accusations. Here, he was just the guy in the beat-up truck, a nobody. And that was exactly how he wanted it. But the complaints changed things. They were too specific, too relentless to be random. Someone wanted him gone. He looked across the street at the sterile, brightly lit facade of a Quick Bite Burger, a cog in a vast corporate machine. Its sign, a grinning cartoon burger, seemed to leer at him. He knew with a certainty that settled like cold lead in his stomach that the complaints originated there. His simple, perfect burgers were a quiet rebellion against their processed, soulless patties, and the machine did not tolerate rebellion. He leaned against the cold metal of his truck, the wind biting at his cheeks. For 2 years, he had asked for nothing. He had kept his head down, served his food, and faded into the background. He had built a life of quiet penance. But this felt different. This was not the indifferent cruelty of fate. This was the deliberate malice of a bully. A flicker of something he had not felt in years, something hot and sharp, sparked in his chest. It felt dangerously like defiance. He looked at the notice in his hand, then back at the gleaming, sterile enemy across the street. He had nothing left to lose, or so he had thought. But the thought of losing this, his last pathetic foothold in the world, was unbearable. The ghost inside him stirred, and for the first time in a long time, it was not a specter of guilt, but of anger. The next day, the rain had softened to a persistent drizzle. Leo's routine was a ritual, a set of movements that anchored him. He woke before dawn, went to the market for the freshest ground chuck, hand-cut potatoes into perfect batons, and prepped his station with the focused intensity of a surgeon. The repetitive motions soothed the anxious hum beneath his skin. By 11, the grill was hot, and the smell of sizzling onions and seasoned beef began to curl into the damp air, a fragrant defiance against the grayness of the day. He saw them then, a woman and a little girl, huddled under a single, slightly too small umbrella. The woman, Sarah, had a tired kindness in her eyes. Her coat was neat but worn at the cuffs. The girl, Lily, maybe 6 or 7 years old, had her face pressed against the imaginary boundary of the umbrella's protection, her gaze fixed on his truck. Her expression was one of pure, unadulterated longing. Leo had seen them before, walking past on their way to the bus stop, but they had never stopped. Today they paused. Sarah looked from the quick bite across the street to his battered truck, a clear debate playing out on her face. Leo felt a familiar clench of anxiety. He was used to being overlooked, to being the second or third choice. He turned his attention back to the grill, pretending not to notice, giving her the space to make the sensible decision and walk away. But Lily pulled on her mother's hand. Her small voice carried across the wet asphalt. "Mommy, please? It smells like Happy." Sarah's shoulders slumped in a gentle defeat. She guided Lily toward the service window. "Hello," she said, her voice soft. "How much for a burger and fries?" Leo recited the price, his own voice rusty from disuse. He watched as Sarah opened her worn wallet and counted the few bills inside. He saw her do the quick, silent math of a parent trying to stretch every dollar. He saw the flicker of disappointment in her eyes as she realized it would take almost everything she had. In that moment, something shifted inside him. He remembered a different life, a world of extravagant tasting menus and diners who thought nothing of spending hundreds on a single meal. He looked at the little girl, whose entire world of happiness was tied to the scent of his simple food, and the cynical armor he had so carefully constructed cracked. "First time here?" he asked, his voice a little rougher than he intended. Sarah nodded, clutching her wallet. "Yes. We usually don't." Leo made a decision. It was impulsive, illogical, and went against every rule of self-preservation he had lived by for the past 2 years. He turned to the grill, placed 2 fresh patties on the sizzling surface, and spoke without looking at her. "On the house," he said. She was silent for a moment. "I'm sorry?" "It's on the house," he repeated, still not meeting her eyes. "Welcome to the neighborhood." He could feel her surprise, her suspicion. People weren't just kind. Not in this part of town. Not for no reason. "I can't accept that," she said, her voice firm with pride. "We can pay." He finally turned to look at her, and for the first time, he let a sliver of his old self show through. "Please," he said, his gaze dropping to the little girl who was now watching him with wide, curious eyes. "Consider it a quality control test. Your daughter looks like an expert." A small smile touched Sarah's lips, chasing away some of the exhaustion. "She is that." She folded her wallet and put it away. "Okay. Thank you." Leo worked with a renewed focus. He toasted the buns just so, melted the cheese until it draped perfectly over the patties, and arranged the lettuce and tomato with an artist's care. He pulled a batch of fries from the hot oil, golden and crisp, and dusted them with just the right amount of salt. He slid the basket and the perfectly wrapped burger onto the counter. Lily took the first bite. Her eyes went wide. A little hum of pure delight escaped her lips. "Mommy," she said, her mouth full. "It's the best burger in the whole world." Sarah took a bite of her own, and her reaction was more subtle but just as profound. The skepticism in her eyes melted away, replaced by genuine astonishment. "Wow," she breathed. She's not wrong. Leo felt a warmth spread through his chest, an unfamiliar sensation he couldn't quite name. It was more than pride. It was a connection, a tiny thread of light in his self-imposed darkness. He had fed them, and in doing so, had nourished a part of his own soul he thought had starved to death long ago. As they ate, huddled under their umbrella, their laughter mixing with the sound of the rain, Leo leaned against his counter and watched. He had just wanted to perform a small act of kindness. He didn't realize he had just opened the door to the very world he had been hiding from. They became his regulars. Every day, just after noon, Sarah and Lily would appear, their little umbrella a bright spot of color in the monochrome landscape. Leo never let them pay full price, and they settled into a comfortable arrangement where Sarah would insist on giving him a few dollars, and he would insist on giving them extra fries. Their daily visits became the new anchor for his day, a ritual he found himself anticipating with a nervous energy that was equal parts hope and fear. Lily was a beacon of unfiltered honesty. She would pepper him with questions while he cooked, her small face serious with concentration. "Leo, why do you always look a little sad?" she asked one afternoon, her chin resting on the metal counter. "Your food is so happy, but your face isn't." The question was like a tiny, expertly aimed arrow that slipped past all his defenses. He paused, spatula in hand, and looked at the little girl. He saw no judgment in her eyes, only genuine curiosity. "I guess I'm just a serious guy," he mumbled, turning back to the grill, his cheeks feeling hot. "My teacher says serious people are just sad people who forgot how to play," she announced matter-of-factly. Sarah shot him an apologetic look. "Lily, honey? That's not a polite thing to say." "It's okay," Leo said, surprised to find that it was. He felt seen, not in a way that made him want to retreat, but in a way that felt grounding. He started making special things for Lily. A small grilled cheese with 3 kinds of cheese, a chocolate milkshake made with real ice cream and dark cocoa. Each new creation was a tentative step back toward the chef he had been, an exploration of a passion he had tried to bury. His bond with Sarah deepened in quieter, more subtle ways. They talked about the weather, about her job as a part-time administrative assistant at a nearby law firm, about Lily's latest drawing. Their conversations were simple, islands of normalcy in his sea of isolation. He learned that her husband had left years ago, that she was raising Lily on her own, and that her dream was to one day go back to school and become a social worker. She learned very little about him. He kept his past locked away, a sealed room inside his mind. Yet, she seemed to understand. She never pushed, never pried. She simply accepted him as he was, the quiet, sad man who made the best burgers in the world. Her presence was a balm. With her, he felt the crushing weight on his chest lighten, just enough for him to breathe a little easier. As his small island of contentment grew, so did the threat from across the street. The line at his truck began to lengthen. Warehouse workers, office assistants, even a few police officers started choosing his fresh, flavorful food over the fast-processed offerings of Quick Bite. He saw the manager, a man in a cheap suit with a permanently sour expression, watching from his glass-fronted restaurant. The man's name, Leo learned from another customer, was Marcus Thorne. Thorne would stand there, arms crossed, his face tightening with every customer that queued up at the rolling stove. The official complaints escalated. A fire inspector showed up, clipboard in hand, and spent an hour scrutinizing his truck, only to leave with a grudging nod of approval. "Everything's up to code," he'd said, sounding almost disappointed. A health inspector followed a few days later, swabbing surfaces and checking temperatures. She, too, found nothing. "You could eat off the floor in here," she'd remarked with surprise. Each visit was a small victory, but the stress was a constant, grinding pressure. He knew Thorne wouldn't stop. It wasn't about business anymore. It was personal. Thorne couldn't stand the idea that a man in a rust bucket truck could be better than his entire corporate-approved system. One evening, after a particularly grueling day that had ended with a citation for being parked 2 inches too close to a faded yellow line, Sarah lingered after he had served his last customer. The sun was setting, painting the industrial sky in bruised shades of orange and purple. "He's not going to stop, is he?" she said softly, nodding toward the dark facade of the Quick Bite. Leo sighed, wiping down his counter with a clean rag. "No, I don't think he is." "Why are you doing this?" she asked, her voice gentle. "I mean, you're clearly more than this. The way you cook, it's not just a job. It's an art. Why are you hiding in this truck, letting a man like that bully you?" Her question hung in the air between them, heavy and resonant. He looked at her, at the genuine concern in her eyes, and the walls around that sealed room in his mind began to crumble. He felt an overwhelming urge to tell her, to let the poison out. "I used to be a chef," he began, the words feeling foreign on his tongue. "A real one. I had a restaurant, my own place. It was called Ember." He told her about his partner, a brilliant businessman who handled the front of the house while Leo commanded the kitchen. He described the whirlwind of success, the rave reviews, the Michelin star they had been on the verge of winning. He spoke of the passion, the 12-hour days that felt like minutes, the feeling of creating something beautiful and sharing it with the world. Then, his voice dropped. He told her about the fire. It had started in the kitchen, late one night. An old wire, a spark. He had been the last one to leave. The official report called it an accident, but the insurance company had fought the claim. His partner, underinsured and facing financial ruin, had blamed him. The lawsuit, the accusations in the press, the whispers that he had been careless, that he had destroyed everything. It had broken him. "I lost it all," he finished, his voice barely a whisper. "The restaurant, my reputation, my friend. I felt cursed, like everything I touched turned to ash. So I came here, where I couldn't hurt anyone, where I couldn't build anything big enough to burn." He finally dared to look at her, expecting to see pity, or worse, judgment. Instead, he saw only a deep, unwavering empathy. She reached across the counter and gently placed her hand over his. Her touch was warm, a simple human connection that felt more profound than anything he had experienced in years. "That fire wasn't your fault, Leo," she said, her voice firm. "It was an accident. The man you are now, the one who gives my daughter extra pickles because he knows they're her favorite, the one who cooks with more care than anyone I've ever seen. That man is not a curse. He's a gift." Tears pricked at the corners of his eyes, hot and unfamiliar. He had carried the guilt for so long, had defined himself by his failure. Her simple, unconditional acceptance was a key turning in a lock he thought had rusted shut forever. He didn't know it yet, but in sharing his past, he had given his enemy the very weapon he would use to try and destroy his future. Marcus Thorne was a man who believed in systems. He believed in flowcharts, profit margins, and the predictable mediocrity of the Quick Bite franchise model. Leo's truck was an anomaly, a chaotic variable that offended his orderly worldview. The failure of the official complaints to dislodge this rusty parasite only deepened his obsession. If the system couldn't beat him, Thorne would have to get personal. He started digging. It wasn't hard. A few online searches for gourmet burgers, food truck, and the vague geographical area led him to a handful of food blogs that had started to whisper about the mysterious genius in the industrial lot. One blogger had snapped a surprisingly clear photo of Leo, his face etched with concentration as he flipped a burger. Thorne ran the image through a facial recognition program, a tool his company used for market research. The results came back in seconds. A name, Leo Vance. And with the name came a cascade of articles, reviews, and blog posts from a few years prior. Culinary prodigy Leo Vance reinvents fine dining. Ember, a symphony of fire and flavor. And then, the headline soured. Tragedy strikes acclaimed restaurant Ember. Chef Vance under investigation after devastating fire. Partner sues Vance for negligence, ruin. Thorne leaned back in his squeaking office chair, a slow, predatory smile spreading across his face. This was it. This was the ammunition he needed. The man in the truck wasn't just a competitor. He was a failure, a disgrace, a man with a past full of ashes and blame. This was a narrative Thorne could use. His opportunity came 2 days later. He saw Sarah walking with Lily, heading toward the bus stop after their daily lunch at the Rolling Stove. He intercepted them near the corner, adopting an expression of grave concern. "Excuse me, miss," he said, his voice oozing synthetic sincerity. "I'm Marcus Thorne, the manager at Quick Bite. I don't mean to intrude, but I've seen you and your daughter at that truck. I feel it's my civic duty to warn you about the man who runs it." Sarah's expression turned wary. She pulled Lily a little closer. "I don't know what you're talking about. He's been nothing but kind to us." "Kindness can be a mask," Thorne said, pulling out his phone. He had the old articles bookmarked. He held the screen out for her to see, showing her a picture of a younger, cleaner-shaven Leo standing proudly in front of his gleaming restaurant, Ember. Then he swiped to the headlines about the fire. "His name is Leo Vance. He was a famous chef before he burned his own restaurant to the ground. Ruined his partner, destroyed everything. He's not some humble burger cook. He's a failure hiding from his past. Do you really think a man like that is someone you want around your child?" He had framed it perfectly, twisting the facts into the ugliest possible shape. He saw the shock register on Sarah's face, followed by a wave of confusion and hurt. The seed of doubt was planted. He had not just attacked Leo, he had attacked her judgment as a mother. That evening, the air was heavy and thick with the promise of another storm. Leo was cleaning his grill when he saw Sarah approaching, alone. There was no Lily, no umbrella, just a storm in her eyes that mirrored the one in the sky. She stopped at the counter, her hands clenched at her sides. "A man came to see me today," she said, her voice tight and strained. "The manager from across the street. He showed me some things. Articles. About a chef named Leo Vance. About a restaurant called Ember." Leo's blood ran cold. He put down his cleaning cloth, his hands suddenly numb. The sealed room had been breached. The ghost was out. "Why didn't you tell me, Leo?" she asked, and the hurt in her voice was a physical blow. It wasn't anger he heard, but a sense of betrayal that was far worse. "You told me about the fire, but you didn't tell me you were famous. You didn't tell me the whole world was watching when you fell. You let me believe you were just some guy." "I am just some guy," he said, his voice hollow. "That other person, he's gone. He burned up with the restaurant." "Did he?" she shot back, her voice rising. "Or is he just hiding in this truck, feeling sorry for himself? I defended you, Leo, to that horrible man, and to myself. I thought you were this noble, wounded person, but you weren't being noble. You were just hiding. You didn't trust me. You didn't trust me enough to tell me the whole truth." Every word was a nail in the coffin of the fragile hope he had started to build. He saw it from her perspective. The omissions felt like lies. He had shared his pain, but not his identity, and she felt like a fool for not seeing it. His shame, which had been receding, came flooding back, thick and suffocating. It paralyzed him, stole his voice, and made it impossible to explain. He fell back on his oldest, most reliable defense mechanism. He pushed her away. "He's right," he said, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. "You should stay away from me. I'm bad luck. Everything I build, I break. I don't want you or Lily to get caught in the debris." He thought he was protecting her, but all she heard was a rejection. She saw him retreating back into the shell she had worked so hard to help him crack. The hurt in her eyes hardened into a pained resolve. "I need honesty, Leo," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "I need to be able to trust the people in my life, for Lily's sake, and you can't give me that." She took a step back from the counter, creating a chasm between them that felt miles wide. I think it's best if we don't come back for a while." She turned and walked away, disappearing into the gathering dusk. Leo watched her go, his heart a cold, heavy stone in his chest. He had done it again. He had turned something good to ash. As if on cue, a city vehicle pulled up to the curb. A man in a uniform got out, strode over to his truck, and slapped a new final notice on the window. It was bright red. Cease and desist. Immediate shutdown. The paper was a tombstone. Sarah was gone. Lily was gone. The truck was silenced. Thorn had won. Leo stood alone in his gleaming, silent kitchen, surrounded by the wreckage of a future he had just started to believe was possible. The darkness he had been running from had finally caught him, and this time, it felt absolute. The silence was the worst part. For 2 days, Leo did not open the service window. The grill remained cold. The spatulas hung untouched. The red notice on his window bled its color into the cab, a constant screaming reminder of his failure. The vibrant, fragrant heart of the industrial lot was gone, replaced by the hollow echo of what had been. He sat on a worn stool inside the truck, the world outside a blurry gray smear through the greasy window. He was back in the immediate aftermath of the fire, the same suffocating quilt of shame and despair draped over him. He had been right all along. He was a curse. He had allowed himself a sliver of hope, a moment of connection with Sarah and Lily, and in doing so, had only made their lives more complicated. He had invited them into his broken world, and it had inevitably fallen apart, hurting them in the process. Thorn hadn't just shut down his business. He had proven Leo's deepest fear to be true, that he was fundamentally, irrevocably broken. His mind cycled through the possibilities, each one grimmer than the last. He could sell the truck for scrap, take the pittance it would fetch, and just disappear. Find another city, another anonymous corner, and sink back into the gray oblivion he had come from. It would be easy. It would be a relief. The fight was gone, extinguished by the cold water of Sarah's departure and the finality of the city's order. He began the process of emptying the truck, a grim methodical clearing out of his life. He tossed out the remaining fresh produce, the sound of it hitting the bottom of the trash bin, feeling unnervingly final. He packed his few personal belongings into a single duffel bag. His hands moved on autopilot, his mind a numb void. This was it. The end of the rolling stove. The final surrender. His hand brushed against a small folded piece of paper tucked into the ledge above the driver's seat. He almost threw it away with the rest of the trash, but something made him pause. He unfolded it. It was a drawing, rendered in the wobbly, earnest lines of a child. It depicted 3 stick figures standing beside a lopsided, smiling truck. One figure was tall, labeled Leo. The next was a woman with long, curly hair, labeled Mommy, and the smallest, holding hands with the other 2, was labeled Me. Above them, in big, colorful letters, Lily had written, "Our happy place." Leo stared at the drawing, his breath catching in his throat. A single perfect burger, drawn with a brown crayon, floated above the truck, radiating yellow lines of happiness. It was so simple, so pure. It was a snapshot of a reality that had existed for a few short weeks, a reality he was about to willingly annihilate. He thought he had been fighting to protect the memory of the chef he once was, or to preserve the sad, quiet life he had built. But he was wrong. The drawing showed him what the real stakes were. He wasn't fighting for his past. He was fighting for a future that, for a brief shining moment, had included laughter and grilled cheese, and a little girl who thought his food tasted like happy. A new feeling began to displace the despair. It was not the hot, sharp anger from before, but a deep, cold, clarifying rage. Thorn had not just taken his livelihood. He had threatened a place of happiness. He had used a child's mother to deliver his final blow. He had attacked the very thing that mattered. Leo's eyes fell on the red notice again. Cease and desist. It was an order. But he was no longer a man who followed orders. He was a man with a drawing in his hand, a drawing of a happy place worth fighting for. He reached under the driver's seat and pulled out a dusty, forgotten wallet. It was from his old life. Inside was a single bank card, linked to an account he had not touched in over 2 years. It was the money from the sale of his apartment, the last remnants of his former success. He had considered it cursed, blood money tainted by his failure. But now, looking at Lily's drawing, he saw it for what it was. A tool. A weapon. He was not going to sell the truck. He was not going to disappear. He was going to fight back. And he was not going to fight Marcus Thorn on his own turf of permits and regulations. He was going to fight a war, and he was going to use the only 2 things he had left: a deep well of cursed money and the heart of a chef who had just remembered why he cooked in the first place. The transformation was immediate and absolute. The despair that had paralyzed Leo was burned away by the clean fire of purpose. He spent the night inside his cold, silent truck, not hiding, but planning. He was a chef. His mind was trained to deconstruct complex problems, to manage chaos, to create something extraordinary from raw ingredients. He would treat this fight like the most important service of his life. His first move was to call the number of the law firm where Sarah worked. He didn't ask for her. He asked for the hungriest, most ambitious young lawyer on their staff. He was put through to a man named Ben Carter, a junior associate whose voice crackled with an energy that suggested he was desperate to prove himself. Leo explained the situation, the harassment, the fabricated complaints, the clear anti-competitive practices. "It's a David versus Goliath case," Ben said, a thrill in his voice. "They'll bury us in paperwork. It could take years." "I don't have years," Leo said, his voice calm and steady. "And we are not fighting them in court. The court is their arena. We will fight them in the one place a corporation like that is most vulnerable, the court of public opinion. I need you to handle the legal injunctions, keep them off my back for as long as you can. I will handle the rest." He transferred a substantial retainer to Ben from the cursed account. The silence on the other end of the line was telling. This was more money than Ben likely saw in a year. "Mr. Vance," he said, his voice now laced with awe and respect, "I will file a temporary restraining order against the city and QuickBite for harassment by dawn. You'll have your breathing room." Next, Leo went on the offensive. He used his money to hire a small, scrappy public relations firm. He told them his entire story, holding nothing back. The fall from grace, the years of hiding, the redemption found in a simple burger, and the corporate sabotage that threatened to destroy it. It was a perfect narrative, and they knew it. Within 48 hours, the story was everywhere. From Michelin stars to a food truck war. The Burger King of second chances. Local news crews appeared at the industrial lot, their cameras pointed at the little truck with the big red notice on the window. Leo, cleaned up but still wearing his simple work clothes, gave a single powerful interview. He didn't speak of anger or revenge. He spoke of passion. "Good food should be for everyone," he said, looking directly into the camera. "Not just people who can afford a $100 plate. It should be honest. It should be real. That's all I've ever tried to do. A corporation doesn't get to decide that an honest burger has no place in this city. The story exploded. Social media ignited with hashtags. Hashtag Team Leo, hashtag BurgerWare, hashtag QuickBiteBully. People began showing up at the lot, not to eat, but to offer support, to take pictures of the truck, to tape signs of encouragement to its sides. He saw Sarah there one afternoon, standing at the edge of the growing crowd. She was alone, and her face was a complex tapestry of emotions: regret, pride, hope. Their eyes met across the sea of people, and in that moment, a silent understanding passed between them. He was not the man who had pushed her away. He was the man she had always seen, the one who had been buried under years of guilt. She gave him a small, tremulous smile, a promise of a conversation yet to come. But Leo knew that public sympathy was fleeting. He needed a checkmate. While Ben Carter's legal maneuvering kept Thorne and the city at bay, Leo executed the most audacious part of his plan. He learned that Quick Bite's parent company, Global Food Corp, was a publicly traded entity, and its stock had been underperforming for months. It was a bloated, inefficient giant, and the negative press from the burger war was making its investors nervous. He used the bulk of his remaining funds to purchase a significant, though not controlling, block of Global Food Corp stock. Then, he did something no one expected. He reached out to other small business owners, other food truck operators, independent restaurant owners who had been squeezed by corporate giants. He showed them how Thorne's tactics were not an isolated incident, but a corporate strategy. He formed a coalition, a small but vocal group of shareholders. He became an activist investor. His PR firm arranged an interview with a national business journal. Leo, the food truck chef, spoke with the eloquence and insight of a seasoned CEO. He laid out a plan not to destroy Quick Bite, but to remake it. He talked about supply chains, fresh ingredients, fair wages for employees, and a business model based on quality, not just speed. Global Food Corp is failing because it has forgotten what food is, he stated. It sells units. I sell nourishment. My model is not only more ethical, it's more profitable in the long run. The article sent shockwaves through the financial community. The board of Global Food Corp, already facing a PR nightmare, now had a rebellion brewing among its shareholders. Marcus Thorne, the man who started it all, was now seen as an immense liability, a symbol of the company's toxic culture. The corporation tried to silence him. They offered him a massive buyout, a check with enough zeros to make him forget the truck, the lot, and everything that had happened. He would be rich beyond his wildest dreams. He met their corporate lawyers in Ben Carter's small, cluttered office. He listened to their offer, a condescending monologue about how this was best for everyone. When they were finished, he slid a single piece of paper across the table. It was a child's drawing of a smiling truck and 3 stick figures. This, Leo said, his voice quiet but unyielding, is not for sale. He stood up and walked out, leaving the lawyers sputtering in his wake. He had refused their money. He had refused to be silenced. The war was not over, but he had just won the decisive battle. He wasn't just fighting for his truck anymore. He was fighting for an idea. And he was going to win by taking the whole damn kingdom. The board, seeing their stock price tumble and their brand image in tatters, panicked. They fired Marcus Thorne. Then, in a move that stunned the industry, the CEO of Global Food Corp called Leo Vance directly. It wasn't an offer to buy him out. It was an offer of surrender. They offered him a seat on the board and control of the entire Quick Bite burger division. Leo countered. He didn't want a seat. He wanted the throne. With the leverage from his shareholder coalition and the immense pressure of the public, he forced their hand. They sold him the entire Quick Bite chain, lock, stock, and barrel, for a price that was a fraction of its former value. He used his own capital and financing secured against the assets of the company itself.
In less than a year, the man who had been hounded over a $300 truck had become the owner of the very chain that tried to destroy him. 1 year later, the city looked different. The garish, grinning logos of Quick Bite Burger had vanished, replaced by a simple, elegant sign, Leo's Kitchen. The transformation was more than just cosmetic. Inside each of the 200 former Quick Bite locations, the kitchens were redesigned. The freezers that once held frozen, processed patties were replaced with refrigerators stocked with fresh, locally sourced produce and meat. The fryers bubbled with clean oil, and the air smelled not of grease, but of real food cooking. Leo had gutted the corporate culture along with the kitchens. He implemented a new training program focused on culinary skills and customer connection. He offered his employees a living wage, benefits, and opportunities for advancement. Many of the managers were former line cooks, people who, like him, had a passion for food that had been stifled by the corporate machine. He had not just bought a company, he had liberated it. The menu was a testament to his journey. At its heart was the original Leo, a perfect, simple burger, an exact replica of the one he had served from his truck. But alongside it were fresh salads, hearty soups, and even a 3-cheese grilled cheese, officially named the Lily. He stood in the industrial lot where it had all begun. The space was no longer a forgotten corner of the city. He had bought the land and, with Sarah's input, had turned it into a small community park. There were benches, a small playground, and in the center, gleaming under a protective glass enclosure, was the rolling stove. It was polished and preserved, a monument not to his past suffering, but to the power of a second chance. Sarah came and stood beside him, her hand finding his. Their conversation after his victory had been quiet, honest, and healing. He had apologized not for his past, but for his fear, for letting his shame push her away. She had apologized for her doubt, for not trusting the man she knew him to be. Their bond, reforged in the fires of the conflict, was stronger than ever. Lily ran up to them, her face bright with laughter from the nearby swing set. She hugged Leo's legs tightly. "Can we get a Lily for lunch?" she asked, looking up at him with adoration. "Of course," he said, scooping her up into his arms. The ease with which he did it, the feeling of her small arms around his neck, felt more real and more valuable than any corporate asset. He was no longer just a chef or a CEO. He was a partner, a mentor, and a father figure. He looked from Lily's smiling face to Sarah's, her eyes filled with a love and pride that mirrored his own. He had started in this very spot, a ghost hiding from a world he believed had rejected him. He had been defined by what he had lost: a restaurant, a friend, a reputation. Now, standing in the same place, he was defined by what he had found. He had found his purpose, which was not just to create exquisite food for the few, but to provide good, honest nourishment for the many. He had found a family, built not on blood, but on the shared hope of a better future. "You know," Sarah said softly, leaning her head on his shoulder as he held Lily, "you never did look like just a guy in a truck. You always looked like a king in a castle, waiting for someone to remind you that you had a key." Leo looked at his kingdom. It wasn't the sprawling chain of restaurants or the corporate headquarters downtown. It was right here. It was the warmth of the sun on his face, the sound of a child's laughter, and the steady, comforting presence of the woman he loved. He had won the war, vanquished his enemies, and rebuilt an empire. But his greatest victory, he realized, was simply learning how to live in his own happy place. No longer a ghost, but a man, finally and completely home.